do exactly?
Yeah, well, first of all, YouTrue is an app that gives small businesses an advantage to basically be seen by the public, by the world. And, a lot of times, just me personally having a small business, the first thing you think about is how am I going to reach my audience? How am I going to be able to drive sales to come into my store? And, when I opened my store, that was the first challenge that I had. And just thinking, what things can I do? And, I started putting out flyers, but, you take flyers, you kind of throw it away, give coupons. People don't even look at coupons
Right.
anymore. So I talked to my partner, Jean Paul, and he's telling me about this concept of this app, YouTrue, and how we'll be able to give small business an opportunity to be seen by other people around the area, but in return, pay the customers that are watching the advertisements. I thought, man, this is a great
Oh.
idea because we're helping small businesses, but at the same time, we're helping customers earn cash for free. It's free to sign up on YouTrue, and you can watch whatever you want to watch from. You could be in LA and watch advertisements in New York or DC or whatever, and it gives you 10 cents every time you watch an advertisement. So I think it's
Mm.
beneficial to both people, and that's when we created this app, that's what we wanted to do. We just didn't want to help small businesses. We wanted to entice customers as well.
Right.
See, the thing with the app is for small businesses is a lot of times you're not necessarily going to see everything that's out there. You can have when you look at YouTube app, there could be a donut shop that you have that's right down the
Right.
street that you want to go
My
and
husband and
visit.
I have a
Yeah.
donut
So
shop. And
so
same thing, people are always like, "Where are you guys? I've heard of you, but where are you? Where are you?" And
mhm.
I even said to my husband once, anytime a new store opens or something we're interested in, how long does it take us to actually go check it out? And then you just kind of forget because life gets in the way.
Definitely.
So being able to keep it in front of the consumer's minds is incredible.
Definitely. We want to try and cut out the the error part of it in businesses. You're
Right.
always trying trial and error. You want to see what works and what doesn't work, but that's the worst thing for a business when you're starting off. So we kind of want to minimize that mistakes that a lot of businesses make and try and help them, by putting that because a lot of people are on their phones anyway. A lot of people are on there at least 5 or 6 hours a day, and now they have that thing where it shows you how long you're on your phone.
Oh, yeah,
So
we
why
know
not just
that.
yeah? So why not just go on there and earn a
But let
little
me
extra
ask you
cash?
this, Nolan. I know Kristen is a very tech savvy business owner, but some mom and pop shops, they're not even on Facebook. They're
Mm-hmm.
not they're not even on Twitter, and they are resistant to change. They know how to do one thing, and that's why they've been around,
Mm-hmm.
but tech, it's scary to them. So
Yeah.
what would you say?
I would say for them, just take a leap of faith. If you really want your business to grow and be out there, why not get into the tech world? Why not get into the digital marketing age? Because you've seen it in so many different businesses, places that you might not ever heard of before, but they use the marketing strategies that are digitally giving people an advantage to be out there to be seen, and these businesses blow up. And you could have a small store, but if you're able to ship out all over the country, and people see you, then sure you can ship wherever you want to. But if nobody knows who you are and
Right.
you're struggling, you're only locally, you're not going to last that long.
Take that leap of
So
faith.
you said it's free to download. So when people go to their app store, what do they search? You True.
YouTube, YOOTROO.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you so much,
No
Nolan.
problem.
Get out there and download the app, and we'll be back with more great day
And
after this.
support local businesses.
Yeah, of course.
Definitely.
Coming up, the time to get free installation from 50 Floor is running out. Up next, we tell you how to take advantage of this amazing deal.
Well, it may be chilly outside, but we have plenty of sunshine. A warm up is on the way. I'm tracking 70s.
Is your house less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home. Don't make repairs, don't pay commissions, and don't wait another day. We'll get you the cash you need. No agent fees, no closing costs. We'll even help you pack and move for free. For a no obligation offer, call 301-799-SELL. That's 301-799-7355 or visit marketprohomebuyers.com. We buy houses as is on your schedule. Call today.
Have you scheduled your annual air conditioning tune-up yet? Don't be one of those homeowners that turns their AC on the first hot day of the season, only to find out it's not working correctly. Schedule your annual AC tune-up now with McCarthy Services for only $59. But do it fast. This $59 AC tune-up special ends soon. McCarthy Services, heating, cooling, and plumbing. Making it work, making it right. Visit McCarthyHomeservices.com.
McCarthyHomeservices.com.
Mesothelioma. It's all we do. With 9 offices across the country, we are large enough to take on big corporations. There is no risk. Let us come meet with you.
We only take mesothelioma claims. Call us at 1-800 system made of 20% thicker material. Downspouts 50% bigger. Scratch guard technology. It's going to look brand new for a lifetime. LeafGuard, the gutter that never clogs, guaranteed. Give us a call right now about LeafGuard. Be sure to ask about Refer A. Tell a friend about LeafGuard, you get cash back. Tell enough friends, you could get free gutters. And now you can take advantage of the $99 install sale. Act now, a $200 Best Buy gift card with purchase. LeafGuard, the gutter that never clogs, guaranteed. And you get a $25 Lowe's gift card if you call now with your free in-home estimate. Call LeafGuard today and take advantage of these savings.
Well, certainly has been brisk out there this morning. In fact, I'm still spotting some 30s out there. 39 in Clinton. It is 41 in the D.C. area, but we are going to see plenty of sun today. That's the only bright spot I can find on this forecast. 53 degrees today, sunny and breezy. Those winds make it feel even a bit colder. On average, they'll be out of the north at 15 miles per hour, but occasionally you are going to get those 20-mile-per-hour wind gusts. All right, allergy alert here. Allergy count, the pollen count rather for trees is moderate. Grasses and weeds haven't been a huge issue for us. The mold count is low, so that's what it's looking like on the allergy front. Here are our weather headlines. It's going to be a cold one tonight. We're going to see temperatures falling to the 30s, even 20s in a few spots, but a warming trend is on the way. 70s by Friday. We do have shower chances, a slight one on Friday. Count on a mostly dry day, just a slight chance there. And then Sunday, a slightly higher rain chance. All right, tonight, 32 degrees in the D.C. area, 29 in Leesburg, 30 in Fredericksburg later on tonight. That warming trend is going to start as early as Thursday, right on cue for the Mets home opener. For the Nats home opener, we're going to find temperatures in the 60s, and we are taking on the Mets under wonderful sky conditions. And we also have an update for you on the cherry blossoms. We now know that the cherry blossom bloom watch is at stage 4. Next stage is puffy white, and then we get that bloom. The peak bloom is still anticipated between April 3rd and April 6th. All right, speaking of the Cherry Blossom Festival, if you're planning on handing out this weekend, Saturday is probably your best day. We'll have temperatures in the 70s still, and then 62 degrees by Sunday with some showers. So let me track over our shower chances and let you know what they're going to be looking like. So Friday, a disturbance gets close to the area, not a direct hit. So you could see a stray passing shower. That better rain chance comes in on Sunday when we have an actual cold front pushing through the area. So my thoughts are that Sunday is going to be wet to start, and then by Sunday afternoon, we'll see those showers beginning to push out, but it's going to put an end to our 70 streak. So we'll go 53 today, 55 tomorrow, 64 Thursday. That's more like it. 72 on Friday with stray showers, 77 on Saturday, and then 62 Sunday. By Monday, we're back to 56 degrees. Let's send it out to Andy now.
All right, so all morning long, we're at Framebridge. You're probably familiar with them as an e-commerce store. Well, they have a storefront now here in D.C. This is Susan Tynan. She's this founder and CEO. You know, we all have this box in our home. Maybe you have more than one. You crack it open, you go down memory lane. There's things from high school, there's things from your grandmother. And this is the kind of stuff that ends up on the walls here.
Absolutely. It's our goal to get you to stop by and get it from beneath your bed or in your closet and up on the wall. And we really believe that if it's on your wall, you'll be happier. You'll remember the wonderful things you did.
Well, and just looking at this wall, now this is a gallery wall for the people, by the people. This is all D.C. memorabilia. And if you want to point out some of the highlights here for us, Susan,
Absolutely. So our DC-based customers actually lent us some amazing things that reminded them of their highlights of Washington. So there you'll see a rally towel from the first game in Nats Park.
Nice.
There are tickets over there from the first day of the Smithsonian African American Museum.
Yeah, right here.
And in the middle here is one of my favorites. This is a needlepoint that two friends who met in Washington did. It's a map of the city, but the highlights of where they met and how they became friends.
It's so cool. And keeping up with, I mean, how busy people are, you guys pride yourselves in being able to get things framed very quickly if need be.
Absolutely. So people had always worried about the price of custom framing, but it was also the hassle.
Right.
And so we have designed the store so you could be in and out in 5 minutes. The sales associate will meet you with an iPad and get a
sales
quick...
associates are standing right over there. Wave, girls. I know, right? They're super sweet. And the cool thing is the pricing is very clear. Now, one thing that is really unique is they have a recording booth. So what's that for? What do you do with that? We're going to explore it coming up, and how you can really just be a part
scratched, dented, or ripped flooring in your home, give the experts at 50 Floor a call. Here to share more about how easily you can update your flooring is Laura Harders. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, kids are tap dancing on our floors to no avail. How can we make it work for our homes and our lifestyles?
Yes, well, you know what? My son is doing baseball this season, so I'm talking about dirty cleats on the floor. And I know it's just that time of year. So I recommend a refresh of your flooring because, you know, if you've been doing sports or had all sorts of people tracking in dirt, whether they be kids or older adults, you know, you need to really refresh your home, get that flooring looking great. And there are so many great options for updating. And here at 50 Floor, we love helping Washingtonians transform their homes.
From carpeting to hardwoods and some other options here, you have a great deal for Great Day viewers who are homeowners who want to save but upgrade.
That's right. So throughout the month of March, we are waiving our installation fee on hardwood, carpet, laminate.
Test 1 2 test. Doug, June, and Judy, mic check, please. Test 1 2 witness mic. Test 1 2 witness mic. Okay.
Your home is also safer for all the kids who are running in those dirty and muddy cleats. I've had this phenomenon where nails are popping up on hardwood floors. That's not safe. If you have the same thing, you can get a free in-home consultation and get started on making your home look better and be safer.
That's right. I want to invite viewers to
Judy, chair mic. Judy, chair mic. Test 1 2 3.
That way you can schedule that free at-home consultation. It's no obligation. Our expert will bring hundreds of samples directly to your home, so that way you can test out what looks the best in your own space with your own lighting and decor. You're not guessing from how it looks in a showroom. You get to see the top name brands up close in your own space and ask our expert any questions you have about, you know, the best type of flooring for high traffic areas or for pets or for kids.
Absolutely. I put these samples on my floor and have everybody in my house slide across them. And whichever one slides the least is the one I would order, which brings me to the ordering. You make it easy on installation day, too. When people are prepared, they're ready, you come and do all the heavy lifting.
That's right. Once you decide to move forward with us, we schedule installation day at a time that's convenient for you and your family, and our crew shows up ready to work. So they'll move and lift your heavy furniture and appliances for you.
There they are. Those are the guys I was looking for. They are lifting all of the heavy furniture. This isn't a job for mom or dad or the rest of the family. This is a job for the experts.
Yes. And you know what? I will say, if you're trying to DIY it, usually you learn that it's costs a lot, takes a lot of money, so call on the experts. And as you see right here, you know, once we remove and haul away your existing flooring, we take that extra time to check the subfloor and make sure everything's cleared off in good condition for us to then install that beautiful brand new flooring that you've selected. And because our crew is well trained, we are Class A contractors, we specialize only in flooring. We're typically finished with jobs in just one day. So that's a huge time saver.
Absolutely. And I love to see those guys. They were sweeping, they were drilling. You know, they may be checking the subfloor for some dangerous things like faulty, weak wood and all of that good stuff. So once you do all of that and you have your brand new floors, you can feel good because not only have you saved on installation, there are some extra bonuses if you go with 50 Floor.
Oh, that's right. So besides our free installation of hardwood, carpet, laminate, and vinyl this month, we're also offering 0% financing. So you can finance the entire bill interest-free as long as that balance is paid off within the terms of our agreement.
That means you're not paying more at the end of the day for your flooring. You get that price and that's what you pay. And then there's an extra bonus for our Great Day audience. What is that?
Okay, so an extra $100 off, but you have to mention promo code Great Day Washington.
All right, that's easy enough. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
And happy spring sports season. Now remember, for the month of March, you can get free installation on your new flooring. And we have that additional treat just for Great Day Washington viewers. Call 877-50-FLOOR before the end of the show to schedule your free in-home consultation, and you can get $100 off. So call now and get started on your brand new floors today. This segment was sponsored by 50 Floor.
And I am here in the audience with students from Bishop O'Connell High School in Arlington, Virginia. Now, since 1975, Bishop O'Connell students have been fighting to find a cure for cystic fibrosis. Their largest fundraiser is this weekend, right? And they call it Super Dance. So along with the senior class, I've got Christina Fumunyo, Student Council President, and John DeSalle, Student Council Vice President. The guys behind me, part of the Executive Council as well. So, Christina, I want to start with you. Remind us what Super Dance is.
So Super Dance is a 12-hour dance-a-thon that we have every year at Bishop O'Connell High School. It helps raise money to find the cure for cystic fibrosis. So as mentioned, for the past 44 years, we have been doing this dance because it started with an O'Connell family who previously had cystic fibrosis. And ever since then, we've used their story as an inspiration to continue to dance and to raise money for this amazing event.
I love that, a night of joy and knowing that you're doing so much good and raising some much needed funds. What's the theme this year? What's the fun going to all be about?
Yeah, so the theme is Band Together for the Cure. So at the beginning of the month, we get the student body involved and have an assembly to kind of remind everyone behind the why of Super Dance, because it's more than just a dance. It's really there to raise money to find a cure for cystic fibrosis. So through Band Together for the Cure, we chose different bands throughout the decades and kind of like a soundtrack of what Super Dance has been to kind of show how we can all band together to find this cure and to beat cystic fibrosis together.
It looks like it's so much fun that you guys have. And John, so up to this point, you guys have raised $4 million or so. So what is the goal this year? What are you hoping to raise?
Yeah, so over the last 44 years, we've raised over $4.3 million.
That's incredible.
Our goal this year is to raise $200,001 to break the school record, but more importantly, to find a cure for cystic fibrosis.
200,001. Okay,
yes.
So our viewers at home can help. How can they help you reach that goal and break that record?
So if you'd like to help, go to superdance.org. There's an option to find more information. We have tons of videos on there. And also you can donate now. If you click on the Donate Now option, you can donate. Any amount is appreciated.
Right. Any little bit helps, right? And
Yeah.
this is a genetic condition, a genetic disease that affects over 30,000 children and adults in the U.S. alone, 70,000 worldwide. Vince, I want to ask you, what's your favorite part about Super Dance?
My favorite part about Super Dance is how the entire student body rallies around each other to really just support this great cause and
Right.
Just take part in the school tradition that we've had since 1975.
All coming together. I love it. It's such a great cause that you guys do. We love having you here in studio with us. And remember, go to superdance.org, right, to help donate and support these kids on their mission to find a cure for cystic fibrosis. Guys, thanks so much. Have fun this weekend. We'll be back right after this.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, because there is a story inside every frame, we're going to show you how you can record that story at FrameBridge right after this.
Hey, bud. Oh, God. There are some mornings you just need this.
Coming up, Captain America Chris Evans is the voice behind a new movie about superpowers. But the stars aren't comic book characters. More after the break.
It's time to trade up and get into a new vehicle during Sheehy's Spring Upgrade event. Get your best price fast and upfront with Easy Price. Don't miss out. Ends March 31st. Upgrade today.
Have you been hurt in a car accident?
Motorcycle accident?
Or a big truck accident?
When you're hurt in any kind of accident, you have a lawyer.
That's right. When you need a lawyer, you have a lawyer. No matter what kind of accident you've been in, call us at Science and Kirk or go to youhavealawyer.com.
Anytime, anywhere, 24/7, days, nights, or weekends.
When you've been hurt and you need a lawyer,
You have a lawyer.
1-800-LAWYERS or youhavealawyer.com.
Call 1-800-LAWYERS or visit youhavealawyer.com. If you have a phone, you have a lawyer.
8 out of 10 things to go wrong with a home in most cases have to do with water damage. That's where we come in here at LeafGuard. LeafGuard, the only one-piece rainwater management system with a clog-free guarantee. We attach it to the fascia using our patented hanger system with screws, not nails, and we guarantee it's not coming down even in the wintertime. We offer a lifetime transferable warranty. And now would be a great time to give us a call to take advantage of our $99 install sale. We're going to bring our factory on wheels right to your house, custom build the LeafGuard system. It's a seamless system, none of those rusty spots. Last chance in this program to take advantage of our $99 install sale. Act now, get a $200 Best Buy gift card with the purchase of LeafGuard and a $25 Lowe's gift card with your free in-home estimate. Remember, you buy LeafGuard from us, we install it for $99. Let me keep your gutters clean forever. And if you call today, last chance in this program, you get a $25 Lowe's gift card with your estimate.
It's time to trade up and get into a new vehicle during Sheehy's Spring Upgrade event. Find your next vehicle fast with Easy Search online. Don't miss out. Ends March 31st. Upgrade
She's a Dutch Shepherd puppy, destined for greatness.
Super Power Dogs is the name of the film. It's narrated by Captain America Chris Evans, and joining me now are two of its stars, Kat Labrada and Halo, the service dog. Kat is the human, Halo is the dog there, along with filmmaker Taryn Davies. Welcome to Great Day, Washington, guys.
Thank you.
Now, I just want to say this is an amazing film as a mother for kids who are interested in either being a first responder, a firefighter of some sort, or a rescue first responder, and then also kids who are interested in animals. Is that why you chose Captain America, the superhero that people look up for, to narrate this, Taryn?
Captain America. So Chris Evans, Captain America. You know, the thing is we've been fascinated for thousands of years by beings with supernatural powers, right? From Hercules all the way to Iron Man and, yes, Captain America. But what if it is that living amongst us, there were beings with real supernatural powers? And what if they were our best friend? Yes, Halo. And that is the conceit of this whole film. This is a superhero doggy Avenger movie, except what's so cool about it is that it's real. And Kat and Halo are examples of it. They are the stars of this film.
And we get to see, Kat, Halo's progression from a pup to a rescue superhero, for lack of a better word. But you have years of experience as a fire captain, and you know how to pick the right pup to train. And we get to see that. Can you tell me about some of the qualities a dog may have who will grow up into be a great rescue super dog?
We looked for nerve strength, like trying to startle her in some way, but for her to be able to recover properly, to be able to want to engage with a toy and to play with strangers and everybody else that you can find that will interact with her.
Okay, I understand you were also looking for a pup that would play a lot with the toys no matter what's going on around. And so that's about that grace under fire and focus?
Correct, yes.
Interesting. Okay, so Halo, you have those qualities? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Halo's looking at the producer like, what should I say, boss?
We just made a movie. You know I have those qualities.
I love it. Taryn, in the film, we learn about rescue dogs all over the world.
Yes.
The shots are amazing. I mean, it's like you have helicopters and a camera hanging from it. How do you produce this film in water, on ice, in Africa, all kinds of terrains?
Well, we set out to do something that no one has ever seen before, because there are a lot of doggy movies, and we love our doggies, but this is different. We wanted to do something. It's an IMAX experience, right? You can see it at the Smithsonian, at the IMAX theaters there. But we needed to do it. What can these dogs do that you just wouldn't believe? Like, these dogs are jumping out of helicopters to save avalanche victims. There are water rescue dogs, Newfoundlands in the Italian Coast Guard, saving lives in the oceans. There are bloodhounds in Africa keeping elephant and rhino safe from poachers by tracking them down over hundreds of miles. And there's even a surf dog in California, which you wouldn't believe.
A dog that really surfs.
But that's just her trick. But her real skill is working with soldiers with post-traumatic stress and helping to literally save lives.
One thing that I thought was interesting, you learn facts about dogs. Like there's a sea rescue dog who I learned can tow. There she is, 50 pounds her weight.
Well, yeah, no, okay. So
is that right?
This is what you wouldn't believe. Like, we think of this as sort of science on a lollipop, right? If you're interested in your kids learning about science and the natural kingdom, would you know, for example, that a Newfoundland dog can tow up to 50 times its own weight in the water?
That's amazing. And Taryn, speaking of kids, there's the footage from Africa. We have a 12th grader from Reston, Virginia in the audience, Glenn, who has a question for you.
Fantastic.
Glenn, good morning.
Hi, I was wondering if you had any advice for people who are interested in pursuing a career working with animals.
Maybe Kat can answer that?
Absolutely. It's a very large field. It depends on what type of animal you'd be interested in working with. If it's domestic in the dog area, you can volunteer at a younger age at different pet hospitals or any type of shelter in order to get any type of experience. Or if it's larger animals, you can always look into a zoo.
I like that. Start by volunteering. Taryn and Kat, thank you so much. I'm going to connect you two in the commercial break with Glenn. And a reminder for the students interested in learning more, log on to superpowereddogs.com for free educational activities. We got to toss it to Andy, but also check out these books on our table. Andy?
All right, so this morning we are coming to you from FrameBridge, where you're encouraged to frame the things that you love, the things that you're proud of, just the things that scream you, right? Why not? So another element to that is if you visit the store, you're encouraged to make a recording because, well, there's a story inside every frame, right? So we enter this recording booth. Susan, the CEO and founder. So what's this recording booth meant for?
Well, we have discovered the most special part of what you frame is not, of course, the framing and the matting. It's the story behind what you frame.
Right.
And so we love hearing customer stories and wanted to encourage our customers to share them, to document them for themselves and share them with us.
This is really cool. So we could get started here. I don't know how far. Yes.
Yeah,
and then some.
just barely.
Exactly. So you either do a photo, then we choose a prompt. So do we want?
Why
what
don't
does
you
the piece remind me of? Tell the story. Yeah. Okay. Let's
tell the story behind the piece?
Sure. That's really neat. So then we're gonna wait for it. And what? All right. She's just queuing it up there. We place our item. So again, this is my same old story. But what do people do with these once they get the recording or they get the photograph? What are some of the options they have?
So we send you an email with your video story, and you can share it with friends on social media. You can just keep it so you always have it documented. And then certainly when we see some of our favorites, we ask you if we can share it more broadly with our community because people love the stories of what you love and what you're proud of.
What's the most interesting thing that you guys have ever framed?
Well, we see wonderful things every day. We did frame a ponytail once, which was pretty crazy.
You framed a ponytail?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to Google that. I got to find it.
But truly, every day we see so many treasures. A lot of things people pick up on travels.
Yes.
That's one of my favorites, actually, are items I picked up while traveling. And again, it's the story behind the trip, not just the art itself.
Exactly. Well, when you put it out there for everybody to see, then people have questions and it starts a dialogue. We're back with more from FrameBridge right after this.
One of the top local Latin groups is performing ahead of the D.C. Whammies. That's next on Great Day Washington.
The NCAA men's basketball tournament is underway on WUSA 9. Check your bracket. Just go to WUSA9.com/bracket challenge to see if you still have a chance to win $1,500.
With Persona Doctors, you'll want to eat less, so you'll lose more. We prescribe powerful medications that curb your appetite, burn fat, boost your energy with natural hormones that keep the weight off. It'll change your life, guaranteed.
Guaranteed results. You have nothing to lose but the weight.
Is your house less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home.
My husband and I were faced with a decision of what to do with my father's home. The house required a lot of work. That's when I found Market Pro Home Buyers. Dan visited our home, and within minutes, he gave us a quote. It was so easy. Dan even helped pay to pack and move us. Market Pro Home Buyers truly helped my family when we did not know what to do.
Call us today at 301-799-7355.
Mesothelioma. It's all we do. With 9 offices across the country, we are large enough to take on big corporations. There is no risk. Let us come meet with you.
We only take mesothelioma claims. Call us at 1-800-400-6731 or go to mesobook.com.
Our experience and the size of our law firm makes a difference. Call us at 1-800-400-6731 or visit mesobook.com.
If you need to replace your windows or patio doors, Renewal by Andersen is having one of their best sales. But this sale lasts only 31 days. Before March 31st, buy one window or patio door, get your next one 40% off. And as a bonus, get an additional $100 off every window and patio door with 0 money down, 0 monthly payments, and 0 interest for a year. Renewal by Andersen, the replacement windows that homeowners really want, are now even more affordable. Before March 31st, buy one window or patio door, get your next one 40% off, and get this sale bonus. Get an additional $100 off every window and patio door with incredible incredible financing too. Zero money down, zero monthly payments, and zero interest for a year. Renewal by Anderson's 31-day sale ends March 31st. For an appointment during our sale, call 1-800-338-4949.
At Persona Doctors, we help people lose weight and change lives. We prescribe safe, powerful medications that curb your appetite, burn fat, boost your energy, with natural hormones that keep the weight off. Guaranteed.
Book now and get our most powerful fat burner shot free.
Welcome back. Today we're joined by another group that's participating in the Whammy Weekend happening.
Welcome Elena and Los Fulanos, and they are joined by Jeffrey Tribble Jr. He's Executive Director of the Musicianship. Welcome to Great Day, everybody. Jeffrey, remind us what the Whammies are all about.
Sure. So the Whammies is a 31-year-old music award show that celebrates and honors DC area artists and musicians. And they are now under the Musicianship's umbrella, and we're bringing it back this weekend.
That is awesome.
One of the groups nominated is Elena and Los Fulanos. Tell us about your group and the music you play.
Yeah, we do bilingual Latin folk. We're based here in Washington, D.C. We've been together since 2011. We just released our second album called Volcan. We just released it in LP form, and we're excited to be here today.
Well, and congratulations to you. You're nominated this weekend for Best Latin Artist and Group, and also performing this weekend, right?
That's right.
So, Jeffrey, people can come out and enjoy the show. How can they come out?
That's exactly right. So Whammy Weekend encompasses a day conference on the Saturday, and then the culminating award show on Sunday evening at the Lincoln Theater. They can go to whammysdc.org to buy tickets.
All right, so you also service young people in the area interested in the arts. More than 1,600, is that correct?
That's exactly right. We're a nonprofit organization that facilitates music lessons, experiences, and opportunities for youth who need us most.
All right, so we want to get a taste of what they can expect this weekend. So, Elena, what are you guys going to perform?
We're going to perform our single off of our latest album called Ponle Fin.
All right, we're looking forward to it. Whammy Weekend coming up this weekend. Elena and Los Fulanos. Take it away. Jeffrey, you can come over here with us.
Esta canción se la dedicamos a todos los que luchan por la justicia y la paz en este país, en nuestros países y en el mundo entero.
program. I have more energy now than I've ever had before. I can go back and wear my old clothing. I no longer have any hypoglycemic episodes like I once had.
Hi, I'm Dr. Aplin. To find out how you can lose up to a pound of fat per day, call this number right now for your no-obligation consultation.
It's time to trade up and get into a new vehicle during Sheehy's Spring Upgrade event. Get up to 125% of KBB with Easy Trade. Don't miss out. Ends March 31st. Upgrade today.
Well, as you've seen, this morning Andy is at Framebridge, and now this started out as a DC startup, and it's now a national custom framing company.
Andy, what is the most interesting thing Susan has ever framed? I got to ask that.
Okay, that is a great question, and it was a ponytail. That was the most interesting thing you've ever framed, is a ponytail. But, and not particularly interesting for me today because I'm just getting my bib frame. But you know what, this is but impressive. Thank you. She thinks so. But this is like if you have that box under your bed or in your closet of memorabilia, get it out. Find something unique.
Absolutely. We want you to frame it. We want you to hang it on your wall.
So if we got this, so here's the cool thing. In the store, though, you can touch the frames. I picked this one. It kind of reminds me of a walnut. We've got Juliet over here who, okay, so what are we seeing here?
So here we have an iPad rendering. On the Framebridge tool, we show you exactly what your piece would look like framed. But again, it's a really quick process. We show you, make sure you love it, and you check out.
I love it. I'm going to check out. I'll take it right here. But I'm going to leave this with you. They have a grand opening coming up this Thursday starting at 6 o'clock. So, all right, back to the studio.
Andy, thanks so much. Congratulations to them. I love that you can see it right then and there.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
$200 on a frame, so I got to go see her. Thanks for watching. Come back tomorrow.
Make it a great day, everybody.
When the insurance companies evaluate these cases, one of the first questions they ask is, who's the lawyer? And if you have a lawyer from the Cochran firm representing you, they know several things. One, they know that the case has merit. Two, they know that you have a lawyer that is skilled and experienced. And three, they know that we're going to go the distance to get the result that's necessary for you and your family. The Cochran firm. Call 1-800-THE-FIRM.
Wednesday, from LeBron James comes the biggest reality competition ever attempted. To win, run a mile through the streets of LA. But here's the catch. You'll be chased by an elite athlete. If they catch you, you're out. But if you go all the way, you win $1 million.
Sounds like my kind of game.
$1 Million Mile premieres CBS Wednesday after Survivor.
With Persona Doctors, you'll want to eat less, so you'll lose more. We prescribe powerful medications that curb your appetite, burn fat, boost your energy with natural hormones that keep the weight off. It'll change your life, guaranteed.
Guaranteed results. You have nothing to lose but the weight.
Is your house less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home. Don't make repairs, don't pay commissions, and don't wait another day. We'll get you the cash you need. No agent fees, no closing costs. We'll even help you pack and move for free. For a no-obligation offer, call 301-799-SELL. That's 301-799-7355. Or visit marketprohomebuyers.com. We buy houses as is, on your schedule. Call today.
You've been chosen, and everyone is watching. You've been anticipating this moment since the last time you came to Uncle Julio's. Experience the unforgettable moment of smashing a chocolate piñata. Make fresh memories only at Uncle Julio's.
Tiffany, curtain one.
It's designer accessories.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't have to share it with my boys.
Nope.
This stylish Michael Kors collection features a graphic floral dress, a shoulder bag with gold hardware, a textured leather satchel, glitter platform heels, a trio of multicolored watches, trendy sunglasses, and more. This deal's worth $4,030.
But that's not all. There's also curtain number two. Tiff, what's behind curtain number two?
It's a trip to Washington, D.C.
You might have to share that.
Take an unforgettable vacation with 4 nights at Gaylord National Resort on the Potomac River, featuring a stunning 19-story glass atrium, a rejuvenating spa treatment at the Relash Spa, and shopping at National Harbor. Daily breakfast and round-trip airfare are included in this deal worth $6,250.
And last but not least, curtain number three.
It's a Mazda 3! Take off in this sleek Mazda 3 Sport, featuring a 6-speed transmission with sport mode, push-button ignition, and a touchscreen display with a rear-view camera. This deal's worth $21,040.
Okay, so I brought Wesley up so you can have your buddy with you. So anytime that there's a decision and anytime you just need to squeeze somebody, it can be your son.
Can it be you?
Huh?
Can it be you?
That's why I brought your son up. So we're gonna start with all those accessories, beautiful accessories. We're gonna play keep on rolling. Here's how it works. You've got the die. You're gonna roll. If you can get to 10 points in 4 rolls or less, you win prize number 1. Then you can trade it back to me for the trip. All right, here we go. Good luck. First roll, Susan.
Hey.
6. Oh, yeah. I love seeing you guys together. Now, Wesley, are you a mama's boy?
I love my mother to death.
Good. That's how it should be. That's how it should be. You did it. You see that? So easy. No, you did it. No, you did it. You did it.
I get those 2 rolls over there.
Oh, no. the rollover system. You know, we have to think about that. Okay. So now we have the trip to D.C. You'd have to give the accessories back. Those accessories are worth over $4,000. You have to give those back to me to play for the D.C. trip. 10 points, 3 rolls. You win the D.C. trip, then we go for the car. Or you can just walk away. You can just walk away with your accessory.
Oh my gosh. So wonderful. I'm gonna roll.
Let's do it, Susan. Here we go. 10 points, 3 rolls. 5. Here we go. Okay, all right. 1 more roll.
$69.95. It's not just a better deal, it's America's best.
And Doug.
Exactly. Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance, so you only pay for what you need.
Nice. But, what's up with your partner?
Oh, we just spend all day telling everyone how we customize car insurance because no two people are alike, so Limu gets a little confused when he sees another bird that looks exactly like him. Yeah. He'll figure it out. Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
I was thrilled to be able to go with my friends to our annual get-together, especially after being diagnosed last year with advanced non-small cell lung cancer.
Another true story with Keytruda.
I started Katie on Keytruda and chemotherapy, and she's getting results we rarely saw 5 years ago.
In a clinical trial, significantly more patients lived longer and saw their tumors shrink than on chemotherapy alone.
It's changed my approach to treating patients.
Keytruda may be used with certain chemotherapies as your first treatment if you have advanced non-squamous non-small cell lung cancer and you do not have an abnormal EGFR or ALK gene. Keytruda helps your immune system fight cancer, but can also cause your immune system to attack healthy parts of your body. This can happen during or after treatment and may be severe and lead to death. See your doctor right away if you have new or worse cough, chest pain, shortness of breath, diarrhea, severe stomach pain or tenderness, nausea or vomiting, rapid heartbeat, increased hunger or thirst, constipation, dizziness or fainting, changes in urine or eyesight, muscle pain or weakness, joint pain, confusion or memory problems, fever, rash, itching, or flushing. These are not all the possible side effects. Tell your doctor about all your medical conditions, including immune system problems, if you've had an organ transplant, had or plan to have a stem cell transplant, or have lung, breathing, or liver problems.
Where I am now compared to a year ago, it's a story worth sharing.
Living longer is possible. It's true. Keytruda from Merck, with more FDA-approved uses for advanced lung cancer than any other immunotherapy.
CBS News. Real news.
Welcome back to Let's Make a Deal. Who wants to make a deal? You, let's go. Hey, Scott.
Hello, how are you doing?
How are you? You are dressed. You are dressed. You got the orange vest, you got the boa, little. What are you? You look like you are a lot of themes.
I would like to think that I am a 60s, gym workout personnel.
60s gym workout personnel.
Dude, I made it up on the spot.
No, I'm impressed. I'm just trying to picture the gym where you would help someone in this.
I can show you.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, all right. Oh, nothing but squats at this particular gym. Man. And after every workout, you get a Skittle in your mouth. I love that. I love that.
Taste the rainbow.
Taste the rainbow. Now I've got $1,000 for you. I've got $1,000. It's yours. Or Tiffany Coyne. Hey, Miss Tiffany.
Hi, Wayne.
Has that red box right there.
Oh my goodness. Woo! Oh my gosh. I'll take the red box.
All right, Tiffany, what's in the box?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Okay. I was just giving a note to your TV star.
The Judiciary Committee will please come to order. A quorum being present, without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2 and House Rule 11, Clause 2, the chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote for the ayes and nays are ordered. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H-Res 243, a resolution of inquiry directing the Attorney General to transmit certain documents to the House of Representatives relating to the actions of former Federal Bureau of Investigation Acting Director Andrew McCabe for purposes of markup, and move that the committee report the resolution favorably to the House. The clerk will report the resolution.
H-Res 243, of inquiry requesting the President and directing the Attorney General to transmit, respectively, certain documents to the House of Representatives relating to the actions of former Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Without objection, the resolution is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I will begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. H.Res. 243, introduced by the ranking member of this committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, is a resolution of inquiry directing the Attorney General to provide certain documents and records to the House of Representatives. The resolution seeks information related to meetings and discussions that may have occurred between or among Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and former FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe regarding conversations with President Trump, including discussions that broached the possibility of secretly recording the president or invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. The resolution also seeks records related to discussions between or among Mr. McCabe and others at the FBI about launching or continuing an obstruction of justice or counterintelligence investigation of the president. In essence, this resolution seeks records relating to concerns expressed at the very highest levels of the Department of Justice and the FBI about President Trump's allegedly illegal conduct and his fitness for office. It also seeks records about the extraordinary measures that these leaders may have contemplated in view of those concerns. I certainly do not oppose efforts to learn more about whether in fact such discussions occurred, and if so, what prompted such alarm among Mr. Rosenstein and Mr. McCabe, as well as other FBI officials, that they would consider these unprecedented actions. Therefore, I will not oppose this resolution. But I would note that for the first 2 years of the Trump administration, congressional Republicans demanded and received more than 880,000 pages of documents from DOJ concerning Secretary Clinton's emails, but they never sought a single page of information that would shed light on conduct by President Trump. Conduct that so deeply disturbed senior law enforcement officials that they opened a counterintelligence investigation into his actions. They seriously considered opening an obstruction of justice investigation into his actions, and they may have discussed secretly recording the president and seeking his removal from office under the 25th Amendment. After 2 years of refusing to join Democrats in our efforts to conduct oversight over the Trump administration, Republicans have now introduced this resolution of inquiry seeking information about certain events in the early days of the Trump presidency. Whatever may be responsible for this change of heart, I welcome their newfound interest in transparency and oversight. That is why I hope and expect that the ranking member will join me in seeking Special Counsel Robert Mueller's complete report, as well as all of the underlying evidence he has compiled, as many of the questions raised by this resolution are the same questions we hope Attorney General Barr will answer in the coming days. Surprisingly, in response to a question from the press this weekend about whether the Justice Department should release any material that the special counsel collected containing damaging information about the president, the ranking member stated, quote, "It's not the Department of Justice's job to give Chairman Nadler and House Judiciary, or any committee of the House or the Senate for that matter, what they want to do to go off on a purely partisan investigation to lead towards impeachment," close quote. Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government with an independent mandate to safeguard the Constitution, protect democratic institutions from corruption, and act as a check against abuses of power. In order to faithfully execute these duties, Congress must see the report, the Mueller report, and its underlying evidence in its entirety so that it can reach its own independent conclusions and hold the president accountable. The House sent a clear message to the executive branch and to the public when it voted 420 to nothing to call for the public release of the report. I thank the ranking member for his support of that resolution. Now that the report has been delivered to the Attorney General, I hope that all of my colleagues will back up their vote with action. In the meantime, I will support this resolution of inquiry, which is a very modest step towards obtaining the information that Congress deserves and requires in order to do its job. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee and the sponsor of the resolution, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your comments as well, and I think we can move through this. And I think that is a valid look at where we have come from and where we're going to. And I think this weekend, frankly, from my perspective, American people received very good news this weekend when we received the Attorney General Barr's letter informing this committee of the conclusions of the Special Counsel Mueller's 2-year investigation. The top line all included that Mueller finds no collusion. Couldn't be clearer or more hopeful. Now, we're still waiting on the report, which we should be getting, and unfortunately those headlines have been inconsistent with many of the claims repeated over and over but unsubstantiated. As a result, We're looking to bury the lead. The Democrats are eager to bury the lead and sabotage the President Trump at all costs, even in the face of the straightforward conclusion from the special counsel and the Justice Department finding that the evidence does not support the obstruction or the collusion in this case. Complementing the special counsel investigation was a joint investigation last Congress of Judiciary and Oversight Committees. This investigation unfortunately received little media attention, in part because it didn't align with other parties' Democrats' priorities, and I continue to release transcripts of interviews conducted of those investigations to promote transparency and allow the American people to better understand the origin of the Trump-Russia investigation, and why the conclusion that Americans didn't conspire with the Russians was, frankly, inevitable. To this end, the resolution requests records showing the thinking and actions of individuals who fueled the investigation of President Trump, accusations that long-serving Justice Department officials say the facts don't support. Chief among the records we seek today are the memos written by former Acting Director Andrew McCabe, memos whose existence was confirmed during this committee's transcribed interviews, according to the public reports. These memos recount a proposal to surreptitiously record a duly elected president and invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him. I could just imagine the outrage if this had happened under the previous administration. So as we look forward to this, and I look ahead, and we're going to move forward, and I appreciate the chairman's words, I do want to address the chairman's concern over a quote that was taken in regard into a longer interview on what I think needs to be released. I am consistent with a proposal that we voted on the floor, which I voted for, and that response did say that the information and what I was looking for and what I was referencing was the classified information, the 6E grand jury information, or ongoing investigations is what I was referencing, and those informations at this point would, if only for the reason to be made public, to do anything or harm or political. I think we'll see from Attorney General Barr, who has went to by the letter of the law completely so far in the regulations in dealing with this, and I'm looking forward to the report that he has said he wants to make as to the letter to both you and I and also to the Senate leadership as transparent as possible. I look forward to that coming forward. I appreciate the chairman's indulgence today and look forward to moving ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I now recognize myself for purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.Res. 243, offered by Mr. Nadler.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for purposes of amendment. I will recognize myself to explain the amendment. My amendment makes a purely technical revision to the resolution by simply adding a middle initial to Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein's name as it appears in this measure. Obviously, this revision does not alter the policies advanced by the resolution or scale back its directives in any way. Therefore, I ask that my colleagues support this vital amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.Res. 243. I yield back the balance of my time. I will now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Collins, for any amendments he may have on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I recognize the amendment. I appreciate the formalization of the Deputy Attorney General's name and would support that and yield back.
Are there any amendments? I thank the gentleman. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from, for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for bringing this resolution of inquiry before the committee. With this resolution of inquiry, Ranking Member Collins is demanding documents from the Justice Department related to any obstruction of justice or counterintelligence investigations against the President. Congressman Collins is also requesting documents about the President's potential inability to perform the duties of his office as it relates to the 25th Amendment. I support these requests, and I hope my Republican colleagues will go even further in demanding full transparency from the Department of Justice. Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government with an independent mandate to safeguard the Constitution, protect democratic institutions for corruption, and act as a check against abuses of power. Under Republican-controlled Congress, this institution silently and willingly failed to act as a check on the Trump administration. For the last 2 years, they have continued to be serious questions about what happened in the 2016 election and the Trump administration's improper interference in law enforcement investigations. Now that the Mueller investigation is complete, we know that the special counsel did not exonerate the President. In fact, according to the Attorney General's letter, he described a pattern of evidence suggesting the president engaged in obstruction of justice. The Attorney General must give Congress the entirety of Special Counsel Mueller's report, including Mr. Mueller's conclusions and the evidence that he gathers, so we can decide what steps to take next. The Special Counsel report and its underlying questions may answer the many unanswered questions surrounding members of the Trump administration and the Trump campaign. This is despite numerous attempts to conduct oversight by Democrats. We sent 54 letters to the House Judiciary Committee and filed 6 resolutions of inquiry, all of which the GOP-run committee rejected or ignored. Democrats called for immediate investigations into breaches of the Emoluments Clause, obstruction of justice, election security, and preserving the rule of law. In one of these efforts, Congresswoman Jayapal and I filed our own resolution of inquiry, requesting documents from the Attorney General related to the full extent of the ties between Donald Trump's inner circle and the Kremlin, whether James Comey was fired to hide the truth about Donald Trump's ties to Russia or collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, and if Jeff Sessions violated his recusal when he participated in the firing of James Comey, and finally the review of any application for security clearance by Attorney General Sessions or senior advisors to the President, Jared Kushner. However, Congressman Jayapal and I were denied not only answers to these questions, we were denied the right to even ask these questions. Instead of allowing us to have a debate and offer amendments, the Republican majority used a procedural maneuver to erase our underlying resolution and evade our constitutional duties. In this case and every other case, the Judiciary Committee's oversight function came to a standstill. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record a now nearly 80-page document that is entitled A Record of Abuse, Corruption, and Inaction, which details the efforts of the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee to conduct meaningful oversight. And at each turn, at each moment, our Republican colleagues rejected those efforts. I'd ask that it be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Instead of allowing us to have a debate and offer amendments, the Republican majority, as I said, used a procedural mover to erase the underlying resolution and evade our constitutional duties. I hope that today's resolution of inquiry, as the chairman said, signals that my Republican colleagues will finally join us in demanding transparency and pursuing meaningful oversight of the Trump administration. Special Counsel Robert Mueller conducted a 22-month investigation. It was aided by a team of 19 lawyers and approximately 40 FBI agents, intelligence analysts, forensic accountants, and staff. The Special Counsel also issued more than 2,800 subpoenas, executed nearly 500 search warrants, obtained more than 230 orders for communication records, issued almost 50 orders authorizing use of pen registers, made 13 requests to foreign governments for evidence, and interviewed approximately 500 witnesses. It defies belief that Attorney General Barr was able to review the entirety of the Special Counsel's work over a weekend and credibly determine the president did not obstruct justice. Our committee especially has a constitutional responsibility to review the Mueller report along with the underlying evidence and make its own determination regarding these matters. Furthermore, the Special Counsel's report is a necessary component of the Judiciary Committee's own independent investigation into threats to the rule of law involving allegations of obstruction of justice, public corruption, and abuse of power. The full Special Counsel report and findings must also be released as soon as possible to Congress and to the public. The American people are demanding it, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for sending a formal request that that be produced by April 2nd. And I want to end where I began by thanking my colleague, Mr. Collins, for his admittedly late but renewed interest or new interest in transparency and disclosure and accountability, and I strongly support this inquiry of resolution. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't actually going to speak today, but now that the gentleman from Rhode Island has spoken so vehemently about his point of view, I think I'll respond very briefly. I have the utmost respect for the gentleman and enjoy listening to him in this committee. But, you know, it's interesting. You're talking about how we've blocked all kinds of investigations and pursuing these terrible actions of the president over the last couple of years. But I think if you look at what's really happened, I mean, the president said there was no collusion. He said it over and over and over again. And many of us on this side of the aisle said, well, we should reserve our judgment until the Mueller report comes in. And I realize the entire thing hasn't come in yet, but we've pretty much got the basics of it. And that is that there was...
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
I will in a minute.
Okay.
But there was no collusion. And I'm on foreign affairs, and I know Russia maybe has more relevance to that committee than the Judiciary Committee. I'm on both these, but I'm a long time, 23 years. But at this point, I think this Congress has a decision to make. In what direction do we go? How do we spend the next 2 years of our time in this committee? And I know that from what the gentleman is saying, he would suggest that perhaps we need to have ongoing investigation after investigation of what did this president do wrong and when did he do it wrong and who was involved and all that kind of stuff. And I haven't generally, I don't know if I've ever said it, but I haven't used the term witch hunt or hoax to my recollection. You know, I tend to try to be more thoughtful about these kinds of issues and let the facts ultimately play out. But I think to a considerable degree, to go on with investigation after investigation. I mean, perhaps there is one thing that we really ought to go into now and pursue, and that's the fact that in the last campaign, we really did have collusion, and that was the Democratic candidates' folks who essentially paid for this dossier and were colluding to some degree with the Russians, and then influenced the FISA court to move ahead and to investigate their opposition in the campaign. So there really was something to be investigated there, I think. But if there was any collusion, that was it. But to spend our time for the next 2 years and go into all this investigation after investigation, perhaps what we ought to do is actually deal with some of the issues that we could work on in a bipartisan fashion. I've heard members on both sides talk about how the infrastructure really needs attention, that it's decaying, that our bridges and roads and tunnels and ports are falling apart, and they're right, they are. And we ought to be focusing on that, and that's something we could probably, in a bipartisan manner, come up with a solution that would really benefit the American people if we stop investigating this president and let him get on with his job. Maybe immigration. That'll be a little bit tougher because there are some real disagreements, but I think we all agree that we need to reform our broken immigration system. On our side, we tend to think that it's more security at our borders that needs to be dealt with. The other side, you know, will emphasize the separation of children, which I also think is wrong, although that policy was in effect under the Obama administration as well. But immigration is something maybe we could come to some agreement on. I think both sides agree that opioids specifically, but a lot of drugs are killing far too many citizens in our country. And there is some good news. My state, Ohio, had the largest decrease in drug deaths in recent months than any other state. So maybe we're turning the corner finally. I certainly hope so, because far too many of our fellow citizens have had their lives literally wiped out, and the impact that has on those families. So those are just 3 issues. Off the top of my head, I could probably come up with a whole range of other issues. But I hope this committee, and I actually respect the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, as well. I've had an opportunity to work for him for many years. In fact, for 6 years, I was the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee, and my ranking member was none other than Mr. Nadler, and we didn't agree on anything, but maybe the Voting Rights Act we did agree. We had more than a dozen hearings on that with something like 50 witnesses, and so we did agree on some stuff, but we disagree on some things as well. But I have great respect for him. I hope he spends most of our time focusing on issues that we can actually make a difference that'll benefit the American people, not just a whole range of more investigations that'll end up dead ends like this one did. And I ran out of time, but if the gentleman from New York would give me an additional minute, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Rhode Island.
I'll grant I'll recognize the gentleman for an additional minute.
Thank you. I'll yield.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I'm just trying to sort of understand, based on your comments, whether the gentleman supports the resolution, because this resolution, of course, continues the investigation of the president on a number of issues. I happen to think that it's worthwhile, which is why I support the resolution. But this is, of course, offered by your colleague, the ranking member from your own party. Do you support this action to?
I am not going to oppose it.
Okay, so if I can just then say, with respect to the Mueller report, you seem, in your comments, have suggested you're satisfied having gotten Mr. Barr's 4-page summary of it, but I hope you would agree that we don't
Reclaiming-
actually know what the Mueller findings
reclaiming my
are.
time, I didn't say that I'm satisfied with it.
You
I
said we
think it
sort of
would
know its
come out-
conclusions. We actually don't know them at all. We haven't
Okay,
seen the
we're-
report.
Reclaiming my time. I think we all want to get the full report and read it. I want to do that too. But I think that Mr. Barr, when he came out and said no collusion, essentially, I know the president relative to exoneration on obstruction of justice, and I was around during the Clinton impeachment too, and was one of the House managers. I'm fairly familiar with how this stuff all plays out. And yes, we should read the whole report, and I want the whole report to come out to less such things as classified information or ongoing investigations, grand juries, and those types of things. My time's expired, so I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Let me just say that I agree with the gentleman that the jurisdiction of this committee ought to be expanded to include infrastructure, because the committee that deals with it now has too broad a jurisdiction. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania to recognition.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
I completely agree with our colleague from Ohio that there are many areas where we should be able to work on a bipartisan manner, including infrastructure, the opioid crisis, immigration reform. And I have no interest in partisan bickering, and I believe the American people are tired of it. But ultimately, they deserve access to the facts, not spin. And that's why I'm proud to join our Republican ranking member in supporting this bipartisan call for transparency from the Department of Justice. Because the issue of Department of Justice accountability and transparency shouldn't be a Republican or a Democratic issue. We were elected by our constituents to do constitutionally mandated congressional oversight. And at a time when public trust in our democratic institutions is at a low, our responsibility lies with the American people and not our political parties. We know that in the last Congress, over 800,000 DOJ documents were made public at the request of congressional leaders. So to that end, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an AP article from June 2018 entitled DOJ Gives Congress New Classified Documents on Russia Probe, which reports about 880,000 documents being released by DOJ last year.
Without objection.
Okay. Given that precedent for DOJ cooperation, we expect nothing less than full transparency from this administration's Department of Justice going forward. And I yield back.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you, and thank you to the ranking member Collins for this important step toward full transparency regarding the special counsel's investigation, and as well as this committee's own investigation of obstruction, corruption, and abuse of power, including this important resolution and your important, of course, amendment, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I also want to take a moment just to applaud you for your prompt request that the special counsel report be released in its entirety, and I look forward to the Attorney General's quick compliance with your request. Over the course of 22-month investigation, 34 individuals and 3 entities were indicted, including President Trump's campaign chairman, deputy campaign manager, national security advisor, and many more. Contrary to the public announcements by the White House, Mr. Mueller expressly stated that findings did not exonerate the president. The American people deserve to know what led to the special counsel's conclusions, and that includes an examination of the underlying documents. The hastily written and scant summary from Attorney General Barr is insufficient to answer the multitude of remaining questions. His legal conclusion regarding obstruction of justice appears to be unfounded, misguided, and just not right. As we already know, the special counsel gathered a tremendous amount of evidence pointing directly toward obstruction of justice. It is our constitutional responsibility to conduct rigorous oversight and to review the underlying evidence. For that reason, I am so glad that the ranking member appears to agree with this sentiment by offering this resolution today, which I support. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your continued leadership on this and many other issues, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
rise in support of this amendment in the nature of substitute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate what sounds like everybody supporting this effort to get this information. I'm thrilled that the majority wants to get information about what's going on. We would have loved to have had that kind of support when we were trying to get information about Fast and Furious. And regarding the mention of documents, Secretary Clinton, yeah, there was a document dump, which is often done by people who have things subpoenaed when they want to hide specific things, but we know, as it turns out in this case, evidence was destroyed that was subpoenaed, and we didn't get a lot of help in pursuing that. But I hope going forward there will be a lot of joint efforts that, to me, go back to the Bush administration when the Patriot Act was reauthorized. FISA courts, we've been allowing them to continue. And one of the things that has been a concern of mine going back to the late Bush administration years, there is way too much power without proper oversight. And I hope that we will get into this. I'm extremely concerned about the FISA courts and the abuses of the FISA courts, the almost automatic willingness of FISA judges to sign orders. And my concern goes back to seeing the WikiLeaks information about a Verizon subpoena, reviewing the application, the affidavit, and the order. We all know you have to get a warrant, you have to have particularity, describe the things being sought and the place being searched, and yet basically that was a warrant, an application that said we want everything Verizon's got, everything about everybody, no particularity, and the judge just signed off basically, sure, okay, you can have everything. And we were led to believe that that occurred with every phone provider. So that's what opened my eyes and has been even more of a concern, having seen how the FISA courts were misled by people. They didn't tell them that no longer was Steele even a believable person. The FBI wouldn't use him anymore, and continued to get warrants that were based on opposition research. You know, it used to be dossier was a word that had some sound of officialness, but now it's become a pejorative, basically, because it was so badly misused. As it was nothing but opposition research. But I really hope we'll come together, because I think the potential abuses and the past abuses of the FISA courts and these warrants are an area where the country is at risk. And you know, I know there's some across the aisle that are concerned about President Trump. I can assure you there are so many people that are holdovers from the Obama administration, so many Republicans that are working to undermine what he's doing. He'll never be able to abuse the courts to this extent. Not that he wants to, but just, but the potential is out there for another Hitler, a socialist like Hitler, to come along. And like I say, it won't be Trump, but if we in this committee do not rein in the power that is being so badly abused now that we know in the DOJ, the time is coming when we could lose everything because we didn't go after it strictly enough. I yield to my friend from Tennessee.
Thank you. And I want to be respectful as I can and appreciate your yielding. And this might have just been a little error on your part, but I just want you to know how it offends me as a Jewish person. Yesterday, Mr. Brooks went to the floor and he read from Mein Kampf. And about 5 times he emphasized socialist and National Socialist Party, which the Nazis, it was the National Socialist Party.
Right.
And you just mentioned that, sir, and I know you didn't mean it, but think about it. The awful thing about that, they were the Nazis. It's the Nazis that's terrible, not the socialists.
Reclaiming my time, they were the National Socialist Party.
But they were Nazis who
nothing-
killed Jews, and I get offended when you compare socialists to Nazis and
Well,
then put it out here.
It's what they were, and I'm sorry. We need to do everything we can to avoid another Holocaust.
Will the gentleman
And
yield
I'm
for-
sorry the man was offended by the term. Quit using it. Thank you. I yield back.
If the gentleman would you just yield really quickly for one question? They were fascists. They weren't socialists. They were fascists, the Nazi Party.
They claimed to be socialists,
Gentleman
and they
yielded
were.
back his time. There's
Chairman.
14 seconds remaining. Who else seeks recognition? The gentlelady from Texas. What purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Let me certainly associate myself with the gentleman from Tennessee. We don't want to mix apples and pickles together, because that certainly would be a pickle, that there would be any comparison to any party here in the United States other than the Nazi Party to dastardly deeds. But let me indicate an appreciation to Chairman Nadler for his bipartisan approach, but to my friend, Mr. Collins, for laying out the framework and affirming the framework that we in the majority are speaking to. And that is, of course, that we are speaking to the question of a brief summary that was given to us over the weekend, a tertiary summary of limited impact by the Attorney General, who took it upon himself and the DOJ to interpret the Mueller report. And as I see that these are documents regarding long ago actions, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, certainly the current action of getting the report should be equally agreeable to our friends, and they have voted for it, but we want them to join us in the tough stance that the document must be before us by April 2nd, and to the American people. We think that is a very important stance. And as I'm looking at the amendment in nature of a substitute, it is exactly the pathway that we intend to go as relates to the investigatory responsibilities that we have. And I think as we speak to the American people who want the document, I made the point that when the American people hire a lawyer into the courtroom on a very litigious and a very difficult case, they're not asking for the lawyer to come in with a sheet of paper that summarizes and says, here are 2 paragraphs and this is the conclusion. They're looking for the evidence trail to make their case. And so there is no doubt that we need the report, and we need, of course, the documents that go with it, and the documents and the documents and the documents, because there are documents that attend to the questions of obstruction, abuse, and corruption. So I hope that in this spirit of bipartisanship that we can do that. But let me, if I might, encourage my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues as they go to the Capitol today to take a moment to look to their right and see a piercing and powerful display of young people. We know that recent news indicated that a Parkland High School student committed suicide in the last couple of days. They are there with a display of crosses of different faiths that indicate, with names of occupations and various things, 722 Americans are killed per week here in the United States. And there is a display of flowers that these young people were there 3 and 4 in the morning to commemorate those who have died. And here we are in the Judiciary Committee where more gun safety legislation needs to be passed. where the Senate is refusing to put the simple universal background check and closing the NIC gap on the floor of this House, floor of the Senate. I commend my Republican colleagues because I know they could call up Leader McConnell and say, I cannot imagine the pain and I am overwhelmed as I was before coming here. I encourage my colleagues to stop by this memorial. So I want transparency, but as a leadership and as I join with them, we are doing many things at once. We have passed this legislation on gun safety. It has passed the House, and it needs to pass the Senate. The President of the United States needs to sign this legislation because it is unseemly that in 3 days, New Zealand can pass gun safety legislation even stronger than ours. And so I would argue that that is what we need to be doing alongside of the transparent investigations that we are doing. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you. Move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I support the motion nature of a substitute. And I will just say that there are additional things that we need to know. And I think both sides, we may want to try to get similar things, but in a different fashion. But I want to point out that Andrew McCabe, in an interview on 60 Minutes, indicated this. And the idea is that the president committed obstruction of justice, fired the director of the FBI to negatively impact or to shut down our investigation of Russia's malign activity and possibly in support of his campaign as a counterintelligence investigator. You have to ask yourself, why would a president of the United States do that? So all those same sorts of facts cause us to wonder, is there an inappropriate relationship, a connection between the president and our most fearsome enemy, the government of Russia? Pelley asks him, how did he, DAG Rod Rosenstein, bring up the idea of the 25th Amendment to you? McCabe, honestly, I don't remember. It was just another kind of topic that he jumped into in the midst of a wide-ranging conversation. Pelley, Rosenstein was actually openly talking about whether there was a majority in the cabinet who would vote to remove the president? McCabe, that's correct. He was counting votes, or possible votes. Pelley, did he assign specific votes to specific people? McCabe, no, not that I recall. It is imperative that we bring Mr. Rosenstein in. We need to subpoena him. Not a single American has been charged for conspiring with Russia to influence the 2016 election. Not one. That is how weak this case has always been. It was so weak that when McCabe and Rosenstein were discussing the 25th Amendment, that they ended up going that way. Imagine if they had carried out that plan with what we now know. We still have not subpoenaed Mr. Rosenstein. I offered an amendment to include him in the Whitaker subpoena. The chairman said that there may come a time when questioning Rosenstein was necessary. Other Democrat colleagues expressed similar openness to the idea, yet nothing. After McCabe's 60 Minutes interview, Ranking Member Collins sent a letter asking Chairman Nadler to subpoena Rosenstein. Still nothing. And this week we've learned that Rosenstein agreed with the assessment that the president had not committed obstruction of justice. The chairman has announced that he will ask AG Barr to come in, but not Rosenstein. I find myself saying, why is that? And I will remind people that this Russian collusion issue rose immediately after the election, and a counterintelligence investigation was opened based on a Democratic opposition research memo that was produced by the wife, in part by the wife of a senior Department of Justice official. The summary by Mr. Barr says, the special counsel's investigation did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in its efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election. As the report states, and Mr. Barr and Mr. Rosenstein and those who worked on this quote the Mueller report. Quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, close quote. I believe we need to get Mr. Rosenstein in here. I believe that's long overdue. Some of us have been asking for that literally for well over a year. For good or ill, he needs to come in. We need to have him in. He needs to testify. He needs to explain his role in this. And regardless of what my colleagues think, the fact of the matter is President Trump was exonerated. But it's odd to say that. It's odd to say that, really, because we now know how the Russian investigation started. We have a good indication of that. It was politically motivated. We know that FISA warrants were issued with applications that appear to have suppressed exculpatory evidence and that were based in large part on two things: the dossier, which has totally been discredited, and then a particular news report which was based on the dossier that the FBI failed to disclose to the FISA court. That's how this began. It isn't a matter of exoneration. It's a matter of us getting to the bottom of how the investigation began and how there's been abuse and misuse by the power of our police apparatus at the highest levels for political purposes. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from California.
Just a couple of quick comments. I think I'm one of the few people on this committee that actually read the entire FISA warrant and all of the accompanying documents. I started in the morning, and it took me all day until 5 o'clock to read all of the documents. Many of the things that have been said here today, I think, are not accurate, but I don't want to get into a debate over that. I do think it's important that we move step by step and get the information, read it, and then see what else we need to do while we're doing the other things that need to be done. As we know, we have a hearing soon on really the crisis in our agricultural workforce. We have work on the DREAM Act. We have many other things going on, but we can certainly accommodate reading these reports and understanding this information to see what, if anything, we need to do further. And I will just say this: I don't think there has been a bigger critic of FISA than me. I am the chair of the Fourth Amendment Caucus, co-chair. I was the one who crafted the amendments that were sometimes adopted on the floor to limit the scope of the FISA court and of the NSA in some instances. So this isn't just protective of them, but it's a matter of being very orderly and being fact-based, which this committee needs to do. And with that, I would yield to the chairman of the committee, Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I just want to inject a note of history here. It's hard to listen to the historical revisionism or perhaps ignorance about the Nazis. The Nazi Party was called the National Socialist Party, but it was in no sense a socialist party. There were, at its inception, some socialist elements within it, but they were purged and murdered by Hitler as he took over very early on. The Nazi Party was recognized in Germany as at the extreme right of the political spectrum. At the extreme left of the political spectrum were the communists, slightly less extreme were the socialists, various other parties in between, a conservative party, a few conservative parties, and then at the very extreme right, the Nazi Party, which had nothing to do with socialism. And the Nazi Party, when it ruled Germany, ruled it in collaboration with the big capitalist trusts, with the Krupps and the Thysens, who made a key deal to bring Hitler to power in 1932, resulting in his ascending to power in 1933. So despite the name, the Nazi Party was never considered socialist in Germany or at any other, or by anybody at all knowledgeable, and we should not try to rewrite history now. And I will simply say that when no, I will not yield at the moment. And when the Nazis ruled Germany, it was from an economic point of view, it was a tyranny. From an economic point of view, it was very capitalist. Everything, the concentration camps were built by private firms who submitted the low bid. There was in no sense a socialist economy or a socialist ideology or anything else. Now, you can debate the merits of socialism or capitalism or anything else, but you shouldn't confuse it by an absolutely objectively false invoking of Nazis. Now I'll yield.
Thank,
Oh, I'm sorry.
The time is mine, and I did have actually one additional thing that I wanted to say, and, you know, we've gone far afield from the inquiry resolution before us, but I do think it's important, there's all of this, you know, falderall around socialism because Venezuela is a socialist mess and falling apart. I mean, who would want that? None of us here. As opposed to those who think that a more robust social safety net, such as what is available in some parts of Western Europe, might be something we should consider here in the United States of America. If you listen to the outline of some of the complaints that are being made in some circles, you know, Medicare is a quote-unquote socialist program. Well, if so, count me in. Medicare is one of the most beloved and most effective programs in the United States, and I think if we were to say, let's get rid of it, the American public would be stunned and appalled. You know, I think back to times in my own life where having a safety net made a huge difference. When my dad was a truck driver, was unemployed, unemployment insurance kept my family from being out on the street. That is part of the social safety net, and I'm grateful for it. It made a huge difference in my life, and it's making differences in the lives of Americans today, and it's something that we should respect instead of criticize. And I see, Mr. Chairman, that my time is up, so I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding to me. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from from Colorado, Mr. Buck, I'm sorry.
Move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, since Sunday afternoon, I was looking forward to this hearing because I was sure I was going to hear an apology. I have not heard an apology yet. I asked one of my staffers to go back and look at some of the quotes that members of the House and one senator actually gave. One of the committee members here from the Judiciary Committee said, "I'm convinced that there is at least one indictment waiting for President Trump." The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, "He may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time." A Democrat senator who lied about his own military service during Vietnam. "There are indictments in this president's future. They're coming, whether they're after his presidency or during it." From a former member of the House and current Democrat presidential candidate, "You have a president who, in my opinion, beyond a shadow of a doubt, sought to collude with the Russian government." Mr. Chairman, I raise that issue because I think that both parties have made a mistake in the last couple of decades. After President Bush won the presidential campaign in 2000, my Democrat friends said that he was not a legitimate president because he stole the election in Florida. After President Obama won the election, my Republican friends said that he was not a legitimate president because his birth certificate indicated that he was not constitutionally qualified to serve in office. And now we have President Trump winning the campaign, and again, he is an illegitimate president according to some because of collusion with the Russians. It is time that we move beyond calling someone illegitimate and actually get to the issues that the American people care about. And Mr. Chairman, I think that there are a number of issues within this committee's jurisdiction, and I wholeheartedly support, by the way, I wholeheartedly support oversight. It was effective in the Obama administration, and I'm sure that President Trump would welcome knowing that there are areas of his administration that could be more efficient, more effective, and serve the American people better. But I hope that we get beyond the name-calling and the questioning of the legitimacy of this president. We have plenty to disagree about when it comes to policy. I hope that we don't disagree about the legitimacy of this president, his right to serve, the fact that he has a heart for the American people, and he loves this country, and he is a patriot, and we should celebrate the fact that we have someone like that in the White House, and we should work with him when we can. And if we oppose his policies, let's do so on the basis of his policies. And I yield back.
Gentlelady from Washington, what purpose does she seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to first thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your actual education of history. I think it's very, very important, and I want to associate myself with the remarks of the gentlelady from California. I was thinking about all the times in history when multiple presidents have been accused of being socialist, going back to Teddy Roosevelt even, certainly Harry Truman, certainly Lyndon Johnson, and I found a quote, I was looking for this quote. You know, Truman didn't run away from socialism at all. In fact, he laughed about the accusations that were leveled at him. And here's a really great quote. He joked that, and this is the quote, "Out of the great progress of this country, out of our great advances in achieving a better life for all, out of our rise to world leadership, the Republican leaders have learned nothing. Confronted by the great record of this country and the tremendous promise of its future, all they do is croak socialism." So I hope we learn from that, Mr. Chairman, but I actually wanted to speak on this resolution. I am pleased to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle demanding transparency from the Department of Justice and the Trump administration. This issue does not rise to the top of my priorities, I'll be honest, in this specific piece, but I'm happy to help them seek this information. And I hope that they will join us in vigorously demanding equal transparency on our priorities, including a full release of the special counsel's report and the underlying documentation related to his investigation, as well as our document collection under our investigations into abuse of power, public corruption, and obstruction of justice, and more. One of my colleagues on the other side said that there's way too much power without oversight. I would agree with that. And I would remind my colleague who said it took a year to call they've been trying for a year to call Rosenstein, that actually Republicans were in charge of this committee, as far as I remember, until less than just 3 months ago. So the reality is that we have a real issue here, which is people talk about the Mueller report being released. The Mueller report hasn't been released. I have not seen it. Has anybody on this committee seen it? I don't think anybody on this committee has seen it. The Mueller report has not been released. All that we have received is a 3-page, people say 4-page, but if you look at the actual letter, the first half of the first page is just salutations. The last part of the 4th page is just the signature lines. So it's a 3-page letter that summarizes what is the Mueller report. So we don't have a Mueller report. Stop saying to any press out there that we have a Mueller report. We don't. We haven't seen it. So the special counsel's investigation focused on questions that go to the integrity of our democracy, and I think it's a very important piece of a very important document, a very important set of investigations, and we need to see it. The other thing that is troubling to me, and I hope it's troubling to my Republican friends who are concerned about way too much power without oversight, is that even though the special counsel and his team took 22 months to investigate potential obstruction of justice, the Attorney General Barr took less than 48 hours to then determine that there was nothing in the report that allowed him to move towards any sort of prosecution. I think that every person should be concerned about that. And the report did not exonerate, from what we know in this 3-page letter, did not exonerate the president of obstruction of justice charges. In fact, I find it quite remarkable that after 22 months of investigation, the special counsel was not able to exonerate the president on charges of obstruction of justice. Mr. Barr, I think we have to understand, is somebody who has been biased and has told us that he was biased in a multiple set of ways. In 2017, he wrote an op-ed defending the president's firing of James Comey. He said that the president was right to, quote, make a fresh start, and that the president's critics are, quote, attacking the president's motives, claiming that the president acted to neuter the investigation into Russia's role. As it turns out, President Trump admitted shortly after he fired Mr. Comey, not because he wanted a fresh start, but in part because of the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign's ties to Russia. In June of 2018, Mr. Barr wrote a memo, unsolicited, by the way, a 19-page memo. He could only produce a 3-page letter out of the 22-month investigation, but he produced, unsolicited, a 19-page memo arguing that the president has constitutional authority over executive agencies' prosecutorial discretion as well as subordinate personnel, wide-sweeping powers, executive powers. And he also, by the way, argued that that Mr. Mueller should not have the right to question the president. And as you see, he did not question the president. He only was able to get written answers. So I just think this is important, and I appreciate that we are actually supporting this resolution of inquiry, because as I remember it, that never was a resolution of inquiry on our side ever supported by the other side when they were in the majority. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, the gentlelady. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and I would admit that I would not have been supportive of this underlying resolution had not the Mueller investigation come to a conclusion. It has, and now I think there's no reason for this information sought in this motion to be withheld, of course, subject to any redactions that may be necessary for national security purposes. And I do want to say that the release of the Barr summary of the Mueller report has done a real disservice to truth and justice in this nation. We cannot rest until we get the full Mueller report. We cannot rest with the summary provided by an attorney general who believes that the president is above the law, as evidenced by his 19-page job application and his appointment to the job by President Trump, who, despite all efforts of my friends on the other side to hide or try to shield the public from certain facts, the public knows that there is a constant stream of attempts by President Trump to seemingly obstruct the investigation that was being conducted by Mueller. That is undeniable. And I'll note that my friends on the other side of the aisle, while the president was doing his best to obstruct the investigation, they were doing their best to aid and assist him as he undertook those efforts. And in fact, they tried to divert attention of the American people to a red herring, i.e. the Steele dossier, and how the investigation actually ended up being launched. Well, that whole scenario of how the investigation was launched in the first place will be revealed when the Mueller investigative report is revealed. So it's my sincere hope that my friends on the other side will support our efforts on this side to obtain the full Mueller report. And with that, I yield back.
And the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's so many things that have come up during this hearing and recently that really appall me and scare me. And one of which I'm going to start with, which I started earlier with, was what apparently is an effort by the minority party in our House to try to connect and call the Democrats socialist, and then now this week to talk about the Nazi Party as National Socialists, emphasizing socialists. And the logical connection in their messaging is to say that socialists were for the Holocaust, that socialists were against the Jews. And just last week, the Republicans and their president started saying the Democratic Party is anti-Semitic, they are against the Jews. Well, as a Jew and a Democrat, I tell you the Democratic Party is not against the Jews and is not anti-Semitic. And I know where most of the anti-Semites end up politically, and they're not on our side. They were marching in Charlottesville where there were not fine people on both sides. They were arm in arm with the Ku Klux Klan. Neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan were not fine people marching in Charlottesville, and the president did not call them down. And this attempt to connect socialists as if that's worse than Nazis and connect them to anti-Trump behavior with the speech last night about the big lie is abominable and scary. It is just wrong. And with AIPAC meeting in Washington this week, it's even more apparent that this is part of a political effort by the Republicans to try to get Jewish votes, to belly up to the Israeli prime minister, to give the Golan Heights, which I think should be part of Israel, but part of an eventual peace deal with a two-state solution, but to say that God wanted the Golan Heights to be with Israel, and that God wanted Donald Trump to be president. There's something going on that is scary to our conduct in our country, our political discourse, and the whole atmosphere. And then yesterday, the Trump team comes out and lists about 6 or 7 people and writes a letter to national media publications to say these people shouldn't be allowed on television. That strikes of a totalitarian fascist government, and it's scary. And as far as the Mueller report, we have not seen it. Never has an attorney general jumped into the breach like this one did to give his opinion of what it said. It did not say no obstruction of justice. In fact, it said it did not exonerate the president on that. And for those people that said this president has legal problems, doesn't tell the truth, violates the law, we don't know what the Mueller report will say, but that's just a small part of it. We've seen New York Southern District, the New York State Attorney General, districts in Virginia that are investigating this president, and it brought indictment. The Mueller report did indict 36, I believe, Russian agents for hacking emails and purchasing and sending out social media comments to help elect Trump. That's part of what Mueller did, and that's important that this country knows it, that the Russians did try to and did affect the outcome of the election. They may not have decided that Trump won, but they influenced people's minds through social media for that design. Trump yesterday said there are some very evil, bad people who have done things, and they will be held accountable. He didn't mean the Russians. Those are the evil, bad people that interfered with our election, and he hasn't said one word about them. He's even said, I don't know why Mr. Putin would interfere with our elections. He said he didn't do it, and I have no reason not to believe him. And he gets the ambassador in his office, and they give a high five and say, we got rid of Comey. There's a reason our president is subservient to the Russians and Putin, and it's not healthy. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. The question occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. A reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the resolution HRES 243 as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. The resolution as amended is ordered to report in favor.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Bass? Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Richmond? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes aye. Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia? Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Mr. Stanton? Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. McCarcel-Powell? Ms. Escobar? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomer? Mr. Gomer votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes yes. Mr. Biggs? Mr. McClintock? Ms. Lesko? Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Reschenthaler votes aye. Mr. Klein? Aye. Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Stube?
Texas.
Ms. Garcia votes aye.
The gentleman from Maryland?
Mr. Raskin votes aye.
Okay. We've got a couple on the way.
Jim from North Dakota.
Gentleman from North Dakota. Did the clerk get that vote?
Armstrong votes yes.
Gentleman from North Dakota. Did you get that? Did you get the gentleman from North Dakota? Did you get the gentleman from North Dakota? Okay, hold on.
Historically, it's not uncommon for someone who is socialist or communist to get elected or win a revolution and then immediately kill all of those.
Oh, no question.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Gentleman from Florida?
Mr. Stube votes yes.
Gentleman from Florida?
Mr. Gates votes yes.
Gentleman from California?
Mr. Liu votes yes.
That's sufficient. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 22 ayes and 0 noes.
The ayes have it. The resolution is amended is ordered reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. The resolution will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating all adopted amendments, and without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. This concludes our business for today. Thanks to all of our members for attending. The markup is adjourned.